Heavy rain beat down mercilessly against the black umbrellas as everyone gathered around Martha's open grave. The minister was reciting a prayer about eternal peace, but the howling wind ripped the words away before they could even reach my ears. I stood there, 74 years old, letting the chill sink straight into my bones, staring down at the polished mahogany casket, holding the woman I'd shared my life with for 48 years. My heart felt completely hollow. It was the kind of emptiness that only leaves a scar when a half-century of love is violently ripped away. The police had called it a tragic accident. They claimed the brakes on her old Volvo had simply failed on the steep winding roads of Miller's Pass. But Martha was never careless. She was a senior auditor, a woman who calculated every risk down to the penny and never left anything to chance. Just as the first shovel of wet dirt hit the casket with a sickening thud, a vibration buzzed in my coat pocket. It was my phone. Nobody calls a grieving husband during his wife's funeral unless it is an absolute emergency. I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the downpour. The caller ID made my pulse instantly quicken. Victor Thorne. He was the director of the private wealth management firm where Martha had worked for decades. Stepping away from the mourners, I turned my back to the wind and answered. "Victor?" I whispered, my voice incredibly raspy. "Harry!" Victor's voice came through frantic and completely breathless, stripped of his usual corporate composure. "Listen to me carefully. You need to leave the cemetery, right now. Come straight to my office. Do not tell a single soul where you are going." I opened Martha's personal safe. "I found something, Harry. You are in serious danger." My blood turned to ice. The rain hitting the back of my neck suddenly felt freezing. "Danger? Victor, what are you talking about? What did you find?" "I can't say it over the phone," he stammered, his words blurred by sheer panic. "Just get here. And Harry, do not say a word to your family. Do not trust anyone. Just come straight here." The line went dead. I froze, the phone still pressed tightly against my ear. "Do not tell your family." The words echoed in my mind, louder than the storm around me. I slowly looked back toward the mourners, searching for my son, Derek. He was 42, the absolute pride of my life, the boy I had sold my $5 million engineering firm to support when his real estate business hit rock bottom. He was supposed to be standing right next to me, comforting the guests and holding his wife Natalie's hand. But as I scanned the sea of black coats and dark umbrellas, Derek was nowhere to be found. I didn't wait for the service to end. Slipping away quietly, I ignored the confused looks from a few distant relatives and got into my truck. I slammed the door, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Victor's frantic warning played on an endless loop in my head. Martha always told me that coincidences were just lazy math. She never believed in them, and now, standing by her grave, neither did I. The drive to Victor's office normally took 20 minutes, but in the blinding downpour it felt like a century. The wipers fought the sheets of rain, but they couldn't clear the fog of dread clouding my mind. I started looking back at the last few weeks, the missing financial statements, the strange late-night phone calls Derek kept taking, and my daughter-in-law, Natalie, who insisted on pouring my coffee with a smile every single morning, though that smile never quite reached her eyes. I had blamed all of it on grief and stress, but Victor's phone call had just ignited a dark, terrifying suspicion deep in my gut. I pulled into the underground parking garage of Victor's building. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the concrete pillars. Since it was the weekend, the building was completely deserted. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The chime of the door's opening sounded unnaturally loud in the silent hallway. I stepped out, my boots squeaking against the polished marble floor. The hallway was dimly lit, and Victor's office sat at the very end of the corridor. As I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The breath caught in my throat. I pressed my back against the cold wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. There, standing right in front of Victor's heavy oak door, was a figure in a dark raincoat. The man held a heavy steel crowbar, trying to wedge it between the door and the frame. He grunted, throwing his entire weight against the wood, desperately trying to pop the lock. I leaned out slowly to get a look at his face. Frustrated by the stubborn lock, the man turned his head, and the dim hallway light perfectly illuminated his features. It was Derek, my own son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the man whose massive debts I had cleared just a year ago, the son who was supposed to be weeping at his mother's grave. Instead, he was miles away, trying to break into the office of the man who had just warned me my life was in jeopardy. "Derek," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but in that silent hallway it sounded like a gunshot. He froze. The heavy steel crowbar slipped from his gloved hands, clattering loudly onto the marble floor. The sound echoed off the walls, a sharp metallic ring that seemed to pierce right through my chest. He turned around slowly. His face was pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot. For a fraction of a second I saw something in his expression I had never seen before. It wasn't surprise. It was panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. His face crumpled. His shoulders shook, and a choked, throaty sob escaped him. "Dad!" he cried, his voice breaking. He stumbled forward, closing the distance between us, and threw his arms around my shoulders. He buried his face in my coat, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood there stiff as a board, my arms hanging uselessly at my sides. The scent of rain and expensive cologne clung to his suit. This was my son, my own flesh and blood. But as he held me tight, all I could hear was Victor's terrified voice warning me of danger. "What are you doing here, Derek?" I asked, my tone flat, stripped of any warmth he might have expected. "You were supposed to be at the cemetery. You were supposed to be saying goodbye to your mother." He stepped back, wiping his wet face with the back of his hand. "I know, Dad. I know," he stammered, his chest heaving. I just couldn't handle it. Seeing them lower her into the ground, it broke me. I had to get away. I just drove blindly until I ended up here. "You ended up here with a crowbar, trying to break into Victor Thorne's office," I pressed, locking my eyes onto his. "Don't lie to me, Derek. Not today." He shook his head frantically, his eyes full of pleading. "I'm not lying, Dad. It's about Mom. A few weeks ago, she told me she kept a private journal, a family diary. She said it had her favorite memories of us, stories from my childhood, things she wanted to pass down to my kids one day. She told me she kept it in her personal lockbox inside Victor's office safe." He took a shaky breath, looking down at his shoes before meeting my gaze again. "When I called Victor this morning to ask for it, he completely brushed me off. He told me the safe was company property and that I had no right to it. He refused to give it to me, Dad. I just wanted something of hers to hold on to today. I wasn't trying to steal money. I just wanted my mother's handwriting. I'm so sorry. The grief just made me lose my mind." I looked at him. The tears streaming down his cheeks looked so genuine. His voice carried the exact pitch of a heartbroken, grieving son. And a huge part of me, the part that had been a father for 42 years, desperately wanted to believe him. You see, parents have a massive blind spot when it comes to their children. We will overlook a mountain of red flags just to preserve the image of the child we raised. 5 years ago, Derek had come to me crying just like this. His commercial real estate business was on the verge of absolute collapse. He had made terrible investments, trusted the wrong developers, and was facing ruin along with potential legal trouble. Martha and I had spent 30 years building my structural engineering firm from a single desk in a garage into a $5 million business. That was our retirement, our life's work, but he was my son. So I sold it. I took that $5 million, cleared his massive debts, and injected the rest into his company to keep him afloat. Martha had been hesitant, but I convinced her. We had saved enough to live comfortably, and I couldn't bear to watch my own child lose everything. I had spent my life fixing broken structures, and I truly believed I could fix his broken life too. I wanted to believe that the boy standing in front of me now was just hurting, making a foolish mistake out of love for his mother. "Put the crowbar away," I said quietly. My voice felt heavy, like I was speaking with a mouth full of sand. He nodded quickly, leaning down to grab the tool. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I should get back. Natalie is probably frantic, wondering where I am." Yes, I said. Go back to your wife. Go home, Derek. Don't do anything else foolish today. I'll talk to Victor about the journal. Thanks, Dad, he murmured. He hugged me tight one more time. As he walked past me toward the elevator, I watched his reflection in the glass paneling. His posture straightened almost instantly. The shaking in his shoulders stopped. The crying ceased. He stepped into the elevator, the doors slid shut, and I was left alone in the silent hallway. I turned my attention back to the heavy oak door. The wood around the lock was splintered from Derek's violent prying, but the door was actually cracked open. The lock had already been bypassed. Derek hadn't needed to force his way in at all. He had just been frustrated by a secondary deadbolt, or perhaps he had already finished what he came to do. I pushed the door open. The hinges let out a soft whine. I walked into the reception area. The lights were off, and the only illumination was the gray, stormy light filtering through the large floor-to-ceiling windows. "Victor!" I called out. My voice was steady, but my hands were trembling. "Victor, it's Harrison. I'm here." No answer. I walked past the reception desk and entered his private office. The room was freezing. The leather chair was empty. The wide mahogany desk was cleared of everything except a desk lamp. I looked toward the corner, where a heavy steel safe was built into the wall. The thick metal door was wide open. Victor was nowhere to be found. Standing alone in the dark office, listening to the rain beat against the glass, I realized I was completely on my own now. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, moving from the raging storm into the deceptive warmth of the foyer. The faint scent of cinnamon and roasted chicken lingered in the air. It was a picture-perfect illusion of domestic comfort that made my stomach turn. I slowly took off my soaked coat and hung it on the brass hook by the door. The sound of the television drifted from the living room, muffled and low. As I walked down the hallway, the hardwood flooring creaking familiarly under my weight, Natalie stepped out of the kitchen. She wore a soft gray cardigan, her dark hair pulled back into a loose bun, styled perfectly to look like someone who had been crying all day. The edges of her eyes were artificially red and puffy. "Harrison," she gasped softly, rushing toward me with open arms. "We've been worried sick. Derek told me you had to leave the cemetery. Are you okay? You look absolutely frozen." I let her embrace me. Her perfume, a sharp floral scent, filled my nose. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to push her away. I patted her back stiffly. "I'm fine, Natalie. It was just all too much. The rain, the dirt hitting the wood. I had to get away for a little while." "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed, stepping back to give me a deeply practiced look of sympathy. "Derek is upstairs, lying down. He's absolutely devastated. Come sit in the kitchen. I made you something warm." I followed her into the brightly lit kitchen. The granite countertops were spotless. On the center island sat a steaming ceramic mug next to a thick stack of stapled documents, with a sleek silver pen resting on top. "Sit down," she urged, gently pulling out a high stool for me. "I brewed your favorite chamomile tea. You need to warm up before you catch a cold. Also, I really hate to bring this up right now, but the funeral director sent over these waiver forms." I slid onto the stool, my eyes locking onto the mug. Tiny wisps of steam rose from the pale yellow liquid. The words from Victor's note flashed in my mind like a neon sign in a dark room. "Do not consume anything they give you." I looked at Natalie. She was smiling, but it was a tight, expectant smile. Her eyes darted briefly between my face, the mug, and then the documents. "They need your signature tonight," she explained, her voice dropping into a soft, apologetic whisper. "It's just standard paperwork to finalize the burial plot and release the funds to the church. Derek was going to handle it, but since you're the primary account holder, they need your direct authorization. It'll just take a second, and then you can go upstairs and get some rest." I nodded slowly, reaching out with a cold hand to grip the warm mug. The heat seeped into my palm, but the chill in my blood remained. I brought the cup close to my face, inhaling the aroma. Underlying the sweet, earthy scent of chamomile, there was something else. A faint, chalky undertone that I never would have noticed if I wasn't actively looking for it. I set the mug back down without taking a single sip. "Let me look over these first." I said, reaching into my shirt pocket. I patted my chest, then my pants pockets, feigning a look of mild confusion. Oh, how frustrating. I must have left my reading glasses in the truck. Natalie reached across the island, her manicured nail tapping the paperwork, gently. You don't even need to read them, Harrison. It's all standard legal jargon. Just sign at the bottom where the sticky notes are. We want to get this out of the way so you can focus on grieving. I can't sign anything without my glasses, Natalie, I insisted, keeping my voice gentle but firm. My eyes aren't what they used to be. I pulled the paperwork closer to my face, squinting hard. I held the stack just inches from my nose, pretending to struggle with the blurry text. But while my eyes were old, I wasn't completely blind. Through my intentionally narrowed gaze, the bold black letters at the top of the first page came into sharp focus. This wasn't a funeral waiver. There was no mention of a burial plot, a cemetery, or a church anywhere on it. The document was titled, Comprehensive General Medical and Financial Power of Attorney. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scanned the dense paragraphs below. It was an absolute surrender. By signing this document, I would be legally declaring myself mentally unsound. I would be granting my son, Derek Ward, irrevocable control over my healthcare decisions, my bank accounts, my property, and the entire $6 million family trust I had spent my life building. If I put my name on that dotted line, Derek could sell the house right out from under me tomorrow morning, drain my accounts, and have me locked away in a care facility before the weekend was over. They weren't just stealing my money. They were erasing me completely. I looked up at Natalie. She was watching me intently, her fingers tapping a silent, impatient rhythm against the granite countertop. Her mask of sympathy was beginning to slip, exposing the cold, calculating anticipation underneath. I needed to destroy these documents, but I couldn't let her know that I understood what they were. I shifted my weight on the stool, fumbling clumsily with the paperwork. As I reached forward to grab the silver pen, I purposely let my elbow clip the side of the heavy ceramic mug. The cup tipped over instantly. The scalding, medicated tea flooded across the kitchen island like a yellow tide, swallowing the stack of documents. Natalie shrieked, jumping back as the hot liquid ruined the crisp pages. "Oh, I am so incredibly sorry, Natalie!" I gasped in feigned panic, grabbing a handful of paper towels from the counter. I blundered around, wiping at the soaked documents, ensuring I thoroughly smeared the black ink. My old hands just completely gave out on me. I'm just so exhausted tonight. Natalie stood there in absolute silence, staring at the ruined paperwork. The warmth of the sweet, grieving daughter-in-law vanished instantly. Her jaw was set so tight, a small muscle near her left eye twitched. For one terrifying second, I thought she was going to strike me. She took a deep breath, forcing her shoulders to drop. "It's fine, Harrison," she said, her voice tight and clipped. "It was just an accident. I'll just have the funeral director print out a fresh set tomorrow. Go on upstairs to bed now. You've had a very long, tragic day." I nodded meekly, keeping my head down to hide the sharp clarity that had suddenly filled my eyes. I wished her a good night and slowly made my way upstairs. I walked into the spacious master suite I had shared with Martha for decades. The sweet scent of her vanilla lotion still lingered in the air. I didn't turn on the lights. I just removed my shoes, climbed onto the mattress, and sat silently in the suffocating darkness. I sat motionless for hours, listening intently to the ambient sounds of the house, the wind howling outside the window, the distant hum of the refrigerator. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. If Derek was truly capable of bringing harm to his own mother, there was absolutely no line he wouldn't cross. I had to gather information. I had to become a ghost. Around midnight, I finally heard the heavy thud of Derek's footsteps coming up from the basement, followed by the soft murmur of his voice, blending with Natalie's in the kitchen. Directly below my room, they were whispering. I pushed myself up from the bed slowly. My thick wool socks would muffle my footsteps on the hardwood. I crept out of the bedroom, moving with a level of caution and grace I hadn't used since my days as a young engineer. I knew exactly which floorboards creaked and which ones were silent. Pressing my back against the plastered wall, I made my way down the hallway. The only light was the pale moon filtering through the storm clouds, As I reached the stairs, the voices from the kitchen became clearer. I stepped down, one stair at a time, pausing to listen. "He destroyed the paperwork, Derek," Natalie hissed, her voice trembling with a frantic, unhinged panic. "I swear he knocked that stupid tea over on purpose." He looked right at me. "He knows something is wrong." "Keep your voice down, Natalie," Derek snapped. His tone was cold, flat, completely devoid of the weeping, pathetic boy I had seen in the hallway outside Victor's office. "You're overthinking this. He's 74 years old and just buried his wife. He's confused, clumsy, and half-blind without his glasses. He doesn't know a thing. He's exactly where we need him to be." "But we need him somewhere secure, and his name needs to be on that power of attorney," she shot back. "We're running out of time. The lenders called again while you were at the office building. They only gave us until the end of the month. If we don't wire them $2 million by the 30th, they aren't going to send warning texts anymore. They're going to show up at our front door." My chest tightened sharply. $2 million? His debt was staggering. He hadn't just made bad investments. He was involved with dangerous, violent people. And he was using my life savings to pay for a grave he had dug for himself. "I'll handle the money," Derek said, his voice dropping into a dangerously icy register. "You just handle the old man. I told you the doctor is coming on Friday at 4 p.m. We only have a few days to make sure his medical evaluation is ironclad." "I'm trying," Natalie argued, "but the tea trick is too slow. He didn't even drink it tonight. What if he refuses to eat the food I make? What if the symptoms aren't strong enough when the doctor arrives?" "Then stop playing around with the tea," Derek ordered. "Just double his dosage. Crush the pills directly into his oatmeal tomorrow morning. Put it in his soup at dinner. I don't care if it makes him sick. I don't care if it accelerates the mental decline. By Friday afternoon, he needs to be completely out of it, practically catatonic. The doctor needs to see a man who can't even remember his own name, let alone manage a $6 million estate." I froze on the stairs, my hand gripping the wooden banister so hard to keep my knees from buckling under me. The sheer, calculated malice of their conversation washed over me like a bucket of ice water. They weren't waiting for me to pass away. They were actively destroying my cognitive functions. They were feeding me antipsychotics or heavy sedatives, trying to artificially induce the symptoms of severe dementia. They wanted to erase my mind, my personality, and my dignity. They wanted to turn me into a helpless, drooling shell of a person, so a corrupt doctor would quickly declare me legally incompetent. That was their grand strategy. Lock me away in a ward, take control of the family trust, and leave me to rot in a medically induced fog, while they freely spent my life savings. Turning around, I silently crept back upstairs, my blood running absolutely cold. I knew right then that I had less than a week to save my own life. The next morning, the sun rose, casting a pale, cold light through my bedroom shears. I hadn't slept a single minute. My eyes burned and my chest felt tight, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The paralyzing grief of losing Martha had been brutally replaced by a cold, calculating instinct to survive. Long before I was a wealthy business owner, and decades before I became a husband or a father, I was a structural engineer with the United States Army. I served 2 tours in Vietnam, building bridges under the cover of darkness and clearing enemy traps where even a single millimeter of error meant instant death. The military teaches you that in a combat zone, panic is a luxury you cannot afford. Patience and precision are your only true weapons. And there was no doubt about it. My own home had officially become a combat zone. I knew I couldn't confront Derek and Natalie directly. If I showed even the slightest hint that I was onto them, they would only accelerate their timeline. I had to play the part they had written for me. I had to become the helpless, fading old man they so desperately needed me to be. I dragged myself out of bed, deliberately leaving my hair uncombed and my pajamas messy and untucked. I shuffled down the stairs, letting my feet drag heavily against the hardwood flooring, so my footsteps sounded heavy and hesitant. When I reached the kitchen, the air was thick with the scent of brown sugar and cinnamon. Natalie stood by the stove, humming a cheerful pop song. She turned around, a bright, completely engineered smile plastered across her face. "Good morning, Harrison," she chirped, wiping her hands on her floral apron. "Sleep well? I made you a nice warm bowl of oatmeal." I stood in the doorway, letting my shoulders slump. I stared blankly at her for a long moment, my mouth slightly open before finally responding. "Where's Martha?" I mumbled, keeping my voice raspy and confused. "Why isn't she making breakfast?" Natalie's smile faltered for a mere fraction of a second, a flash of genuine irritation crossing her features, before she smoothed it over with a look of manufactured pity. "Oh, Harrison," she cooed softly, walking over to place a gentle hand on my arm. "Martha passed away, remember? We just had the funeral yesterday. You just need to sit down and eat something. You'll feel much better." She guided me to a stool at the island and placed a steaming ceramic bowl in front of me. Right next to the bowl was a small plastic cup holding my daily blood pressure medication, but mixed in with it were 3 new, completely unmarked white capsules. I stared at the pills, forcing a severe, visible tremor into both of my hands. "What are these?" I asked, my voice trembling perfectly. My hands shook so violently that when I reached for the cup, I accidentally knocked it over, sending the pills scattering across the granite countertop. "Oh, goodness! Let me help you with that," Natalie sighed, a heavy note of barely concealed annoyance creeping into her tone. She scooped the pills back into the cup. "These are your new vitamins. The doctor said your memory needs them. Take them with your oatmeal. I need to go upstairs and wake Derek. Eat every bite, Harrison. It's very important for your health." She turned on her heel and strode out of the kitchen, her footsteps fading up the stairs. The moment she was out of sight, my trembling hands instantly became completely still. My movements were swift and silent. Reaching into my pajama pocket, I pulled out 3 white mints I had retrieved from my travel bag earlier that morning. They were roughly the same size and shape as the mysterious capsules. I quickly grabbed the 3 unmarked pills from the counter, shoving them deep into my pocket to save for later testing. I dropped the mints into the small cup next to my blood pressure medication. Then I turned my attention to the steaming bowl of oatmeal. Derek had explicitly told her to double the dosage and crush it directly into my food. I couldn't risk taking even a single spoonful. Grabbing the bowl, I walked noiselessly to the sink and scraped the entire thick serving straight down the drain. I turned on the faucet, running the hot water, and flipped the switch for the garbage disposal. The machine roared to life, violently grinding and washing away the toxic breakfast. To make it look authentic, I took a spoon, smeared a small amount of the remaining oatmeal residue around the inside edge of the bowl, and set it back on the kitchen island next to the empty plastic pill cup. I sat back down on the stool, chewed up my blood pressure medication along with the 3 mints, and waited. 10 minutes later, Natalie returned to the kitchen, her eyes immediately darting to the empty bowl and cup. A look of supreme satisfaction washed over her face. "Good job, Harrison," she praised, speaking to me as if I were a toddler. "Now, why don't you go sit in your recliner and watch some television?" I spent the entire day staring blankly at the TV, playing the fool while internally drafting my blueprint for survival. The toxic capsules hidden in my pocket were undeniable evidence, but I needed allies. When night finally fell, I waited until the clock struck 2 in the morning. The house was completely silent. Derek and Natalie were asleep upstairs, confident that I was heavily sedated. I quickly changed into dark clothing. Avoiding the alarm doors, I slipped down into the unfinished basement. Navigating the shadows perfectly, I made my way to a small egress window, hidden behind the furnace. I forced the stiff latch open, squeezed my shoulders through the narrow opening, and pulled myself out into the cold grass. I closed the window silently. Moving through the dark woods, I was off to an appointment that would change everything. The crisp night air bit at my face as I navigated the woods behind my property. I hiked through the still brush for nearly 2 miles before reaching the county road, my head down, heavy work boots sinking into the soft mud. My mind was entirely focused on the destination. Earlier, using a prepaid phone I kept hidden in the garage, I had managed to get a hold of Victor. He had given me an address on the edge of town. I broke through the tree line and stepped onto the asphalt. Further down the road, a neon sign cut through the darkness. The motel was the kind of place people went when they wanted to disappear. Tucking my collar in, I hurried across the parking lot, finding room 12 at the very back of the single-story building. I knocked 3 times, paused, and knocked twice more, our agreed signal. I heard the scrape of a deadbolt, followed by the rattle of a chain. The door cracked open an inch. A pair of tired, bloodshot eyes peered out from the shadows. The door swung open, and I stepped into the stale, musty air of a cheap motel room. Victor quickly locked it behind me. I barely recognized him. The man who usually wore tailored Italian suits and flawless silk ties stood before me in a rumpled dress shirt. His tie was undone, and a heavy, uneven layer of gray stubble covered his pale face. He looked completely shattered. "Thank God you made it," Victor breathed. "I didn't know if they were watching your house. I was terrified you were trapped." I took a deep breath. "I got out, Victor, but I don't have much time. They think I'm sedated, but I need to be back before sunrise. Tell me exactly what is going on. Tell me what you found in my wife's safe." Victor walked over to a shaky little laminate table beneath a dim light. A worn leather briefcase sat on top. With trembling fingers, he clicked open the brass locks. "Harrison, I need you to brace yourself," he said softly, unable to meet my eyes. 5 years ago, when you sold the engineering firm to bail Derek out, you thought he had just made some bad real estate investments. We all did. The market was tough. Young developers make mistakes. That was the story he sold us, and we bought it. Victor pulled a thick stack of manila folders from the briefcase, laying them flat under the yellow light. But Martha was the sharpest auditor I ever hired in my entire 30-year career. She never took anything at face value. A few months ago, she noticed some irregularities in the quarterly reports Derek was submitting for the family trust. Small things at first. Discrepancies in material costs, strange billing cycles with his construction contractors. She decided to run a quiet, independent audit on his commercial accounts. I stepped closer to the table, my eyes scanning the dense spreadsheets and highlighted bank statements. "What did she find, Victor?" I pressed, my voice hardening. Victor let out a long, heavy sigh. "Derek isn't a failed real estate developer, Harrison. He's a highly successful money launderer. These documents prove he set up a complex network of offshore shell companies. He used that $5 million you gave him not to pay off legitimate debts, but to build a network that washed illicit funds for a highly organized, violent criminal syndicate. The people he owes money to aren't ordinary lenders. They are dangerous cartel associates. And worse, he used your family trust as the ultimate clean front. Over the last 2 years, when his illicit shipments were seized by authorities, he's been quietly draining your $6 million retirement fund to cover his massive losses." I stared at the paperwork, the numbers blurring before my eyes as the horrific reality washed over me. My son wasn't just a greedy, ungrateful child. He was a deeply entrenched criminal who had risked his own parents' lives and livelihoods to serve a criminal empire. Every smile, every family dinner, every moment of apparent gratitude had been nothing but a meticulously staged performance to keep us completely blind to his massive financial crimes. I felt a sudden, powerful surge of nausea, but I forced it down, clenching my jaw until my teeth ached. "He stole everything," I whispered, staring at my forged signature on dozens of wire transfer authorizations. "He stole a lot more than your money, Harrison," Victor said, his voice dropping to a devastating whisper. He handed me one final thin red folder. I opened it. Inside was a printed email and a calendar printout. "Martha didn't just uncover the fraud," Victor explained, tears finally welling in his bloodshot eyes. "She documented every shell company, every forged signature, and every illegal wire transfer. She built an ironclad, undeniable criminal case against your son. And because she knew the local police might be compromised, or simply unequipped to handle a federal crime of this scale, she bypassed them entirely." I looked at the printed email. It was addressed to a senior agent in the FBI's white-collar crime division. The subject line read, "Urgent evidence of massive wire fraud and money laundering." I looked at the timestamp on the email. It had been sent exactly 3 days before her passing. Victor placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. "She wasn't just going to the police, Harrison. She had an officially confirmed appointment to hand over this exact briefcase to the FBI at the federal courthouse. That appointment was scheduled for the morning she drove her car off the cliff at Miller's Pass. Derek didn't just cut her brakes to stop an audit. He brought harm to his own mother because she was exactly 48 hours away from putting him in a federal prison for the rest of his life. I stood completely frozen in that damp, dimly lit motel room, the printed email slipping from my numb fingers and fluttering down to the stained carpet below. Murder. My wife had been taken by the very boy she had carried for 9 months, the boy for whom I had exhausted my life savings to bail out of trouble. I thought I would cry. I thought my knees would buckle under the weight of a grief so massive it could stop a heart. But the tears didn't come. The sorrow that had been suffocating me suddenly evaporated, replaced by something entirely different. An icy, quiet, terrifying stillness washed over my mind. It was a dark, calculated anger, the kind of absolute fury that doesn't scream, but simply waits in the shadows and sharpens its blade. I looked up at Victor. His eyes held a mixture of deep sorrow and genuine fear as he watched the expression on my face transform. "There's more, Harrison," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I need to tell you about the police investigation. I need you to know exactly how he turned an outright crime into a tragic accident." I nodded slowly, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "Tell me everything, Victor. Leave nothing out." Victor pulled another folder from the worn leather briefcase. It was a thin gray file containing bank statements and a printed background check. "It's about Detective Mitchell," Victor explained, tapping a glossy photo of the uniformed officer who had stood in my living room, delivering the news of Martha's passing. Mitchell was assigned as the lead investigator at the crash site when her car went over the edge. He officially signed off on the mechanical failure report, stating the brake fluid lines had ruptured due to natural wear and tear. He completely ruled out foul play. I stared at the photo, remembering the solemn, practiced sympathy he had shown in my home. "How did Derek get to him?" I asked, my voice completely stripped of emotion. "Mitchell has a severe gambling addiction," Victor revealed, sliding a highlighted bank statement across the table. "He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to an illegal sports betting ring. He was facing the loss of his badge, his pension, and quite possibly his life. Derek knew it. Exactly 2 days after your wife's car was pulled from the canyon, a wire transfer of a cool $100,000 was deposited into an offshore account, registered under Mitchell's brother-in-law. The very next morning, Mitchell closed the case, sealed the wreckage, and stamped the coroner's report as an accidental death. He sold his badge and your wife's justice for $100,000. The sheer mechanics of the betrayal were chilling. My son had orchestrated a flawless execution. He had identified the only person capable of exposing his crimes, hired a mechanic to sever the brake lines, and preemptively bought off the investigating officer to ensure the crime remained buried forever. He had built a fortress of lies, and he was currently sleeping under my roof, waiting to lock me away in a psych ward so he could claim the final prize. Victor watched me closely. "What do we do, Harrison?" he asked, panic coloring his words. "We can't go to the local police. Mitchell will intercept any report we make, and if we go to the FBI without absolute proof of the conspiracy, Derek will know. He'll speed up his timeline. He'll have you locked away before Friday, and I'll likely end up gone too. We are completely cornered." I reached down, picked up the email, and placed it inside my coat pocket. "We aren't cornered, Victor," I said quietly. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, stripped of the warmth I once carried. "Derek thinks he's dealing with a fading old man. He thinks I'm an open wallet waiting to be emptied. He forgot who raised him. He forgot what I did before I ever sat behind an office desk." I turned toward the door. "You stay hidden, Victor. Don't contact anyone. I'm going back to keep playing my part. Let them think the medication is working. Let them think they've won." I stepped out into the freezing darkness, walking to the edge of the motel parking lot. Under the flickering neon sign, I pulled out a prepaid mobile phone. I dialed a number I had memorized decades ago, belonging to a man who lived in the shadows. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, gravelly voice picked up. "Speak," the voice grunted. "Garrett," I said, staring at the dark highway. "It's Harrison Ward." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Harrison," the voice replied, the gruff tone softening. "I heard about Martha. I'm so sorry." "I don't need your sympathy right now, Garrett," I said flatly. "I need your skills. I need the man you were in the jungle." Garrett Cole was an old brother in arms, a man who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me in the worst combat zones imaginable. After the military, he had become a highly specialized private investigator dealing in corporate espionage. He was a master at gathering blackmail material on people who thought they were completely untouchable. "What do you need, Harrison?" Garrett asked, shifting into a sharp, professional cadence. "My son brought harm to my wife," I told him, the words tasting like ash. He bought off a local detective to cover it up. Now he's drugging me to steal my estate. I have exactly 72 hours to build an iron trap to catch them all. I need you here by tomorrow morning. Bring everything you have." "Consider it done," Garrett replied. I hung up the phone. The sorrow was entirely gone now. I turned toward the dark woods, ready to return to the nest of vipers. Just as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed across the skyline, I slipped back through the basement window. My muscles were sore from the cold, but my mind was remarkably sharp. I crept up the stairs, slipped back into bed, and pulled the covers to my chin. Hours later, when Natalie walked in with another bowl of medicated oatmeal, I played my role perfectly. I stared blankly at the wall, dropped my spoon on the floor, and discarded the pills the moment her back was turned. By 10 in the morning, both Derek and Natalie were dressed in somber black attire. They informed me they were heading out to a memorial luncheon hosted by Martha's friends at the country club. Natalie condescendingly patted my cheek, locked the front door, and their luxury SUV rolled out of the driveway. The moment the sound of the engine faded at the end of the road, my disguise dropped away. I moved quickly through the house, unlocking the back patio door. 5 minutes later, a dark figure detached itself from the edge of the woods. Garrett Cole stepped onto the porch. He wore dark, tactical clothing and carried a heavy black canvas duffel bag. His face was weathered, etched with the hard lines that only the worst corners of the world leave behind, but his eyes were exactly as sharp as I remembered. We didn't exchange pleasantries. There was no time for small talk or reminiscing about our time in the service. He stepped inside, dropped his bag onto the hardwood floor, and unzipped it. The bag was packed with advanced surveillance equipment, the kind of hardware you couldn't buy at a standard electronics store. He handed me a small blueprint pad, asking for the layout of the house. I pointed out the kitchen, the main living area, and most importantly, Derek's home office on the second floor. We went to work with the silent, practiced efficiency of veterans who had done this 100 times before. Garrett started in the kitchen. He unscrewed the faceplate of the smoke detector, situated right over the island, carefully splicing a micro camera lens into the wiring so it would draw constant power from the house's electrical grid. He positioned it perfectly to capture the granite countertop where Natalie prepared my food and crushed those terrible pills. From there, we moved to the living room. Garrett embedded an audio transmitter inside the base of a heavy brass floor lamp near the sofa, the exact spot where Derek frequently sat to make his evening phone calls. I watched Garrett work, admiring the absolute stability of his hands. He moved like a ghost, leaving absolutely no trace of his presence behind. No dust was disturbed, no screws were stripped. The real challenge was Derek's home office. The room was locked, but Garrett picked the heavy brass deadbolt in less than 10 seconds. We stepped inside. The room smelled of expensive scotch and leather. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the space, flanked by 3 large computer monitors. Garrett went straight for the desktop tower resting on the floor. He pulled a black, miniature USB drive from his pocket, dropping to his knees to plug it into the back of the machine. He whispered an explanation, noting that the program would silently mirror every keystroke, every deleted file, and every hidden folder, transmitting the data directly to a secure server he had set up in his van a few miles away. While the computer transferred the data, Garrett climbed onto a leather chair, swapping out the HVAC vent cover for an identical one equipped with a wide-angle, high-definition camera. We were operating on a razor-thin timeline. Garrett's device let out a soft beep, indicating the data transfer from Derek's computer was nearly 60% complete. We had only been in the house for 40 minutes. They were supposed to be at the luncheon for at least 3 hours, but the universe rarely respects a perfect plan. Suddenly, the sharp crunch of gravel echoed from the driveway. I froze. I quietly slid over to the window, peering through the heavy wooden blinds. Derek's black SUV was parked haphazardly near the front steps. He was alone. Natalie was nowhere to be seen. The heavy thud of the front door slamming shut vibrated through the floorboards. "He's inside," I hissed, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "The data transfer," Garrett whispered back, his eyes locked onto the glowing progress bar on the computer screen. "It needs 2 more minutes. We can't pull the drive now, or it will corrupt the entire file system." Heavy, angry footsteps thundered on the stairs. Derek wasn't just walking. He was stomping up the steps in a rage, and he was screaming. I could hear his voice echoing through the walls, laced with pure, unmitigated panic. "I told you I need until Friday," Derek roared into his phone. "You think I'm lying to you? The old man is practically a vegetable right now. The doctor is going to sign the paperwork, and the money will be yours. Just call your people off." The loud, heavy footsteps finally reached the top of the stairs, and now they were heading straight down the hall toward the office. With only a second to spare, Garrett ripped the drive from the computer. There was absolutely no time to run for the hallway or the guest rooms. Grabbing Garrett by the shoulder, I roughly shoved him toward the large walk-in supply closet situated directly behind Derek's massive oak desk. We ducked into the cramped, dark space, pulling the slatted wooden doors shut just as the brass handle of the office door was violently turned. The heavy oak door slammed open, crashing hard against the drywall. Garrett and I stood shoulder to shoulder in the pitch-black closet, neither of us daring to breathe as Derek paced the room like a cornered animal, barking desperate, trembling promises to the ruthless collector on the other end of the line. Derek's voice vibrated through the closet doors, the desperation exposing just how deep he had fallen into the criminal underworld. Garrett and I froze in the suffocating darkness, the air heavy in our lungs. We listened to the heavy thud of Derek's footsteps pacing back and forth on the carpet, just inches from our hiding spot. He slammed his fist violently onto the solid oak desktop, causing the entire room to shudder. "Give me until Friday," he roared into the receiver, his breath ragged. "The doctor signs the medical power of attorney, and I get unrestricted access to the trust. You'll get every single penny I owe you. Just stay away from my house." He ended the call with a forceful stab of a button. We heard the clinking of a crystal glass as he poured himself a shot of scotch, knocked it back in one swallow, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Garrett and I waited out an agonizing 10 minutes in that absolute silence before pushing the doors open. We didn't say a single word. Garrett simply packed up his tools, gave me a solemn nod, and slipped out of the second-story window, climbing down the oak trellis to the ground below. I was alone again, but the house was no longer a blind cage. It was fully wired. Every room was now a trap, waiting to be sprung. It was time for me to give my son and his wife the performance of a lifetime. When Natalie returned an hour later, she found me sitting cross-legged, right in the center of the living room floor. I had deliberately untied my shoes, misbuttoned my sweater, and was staring blankly at a television screen that wasn't even turned on. I let my jaw slacken slightly, my eyes completely unfocused. She tossed her purse onto the sofa, letting out a massive sigh of pure disgust. "Harrison, what on earth are you doing on the floor?" she snapped, the sweet tone she used around others completely gone from her voice. I slowly turned my head toward her, ensuring my eyes showed absolute zero recognition. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. I looked around the room as if I had never seen it before. Where is my wife? When is Martha coming home from the store? I need to ask Susan to help me find my keys. Susan was the name of a neighbor who had moved away 20 years ago. Natalie stopped in her tracks, a wicked smile slowly spreading across her face. She actually believed that the heavy doses of medication had finally broken my mind. "Oh, you are completely gone, aren't you?" she sneered, letting out a cold laugh. She walked right past me, deliberately kicking my foot out of the way with her expensive leather boot. You are an absolute pathetic waste. Spent your whole life building buildings and making money, and now you're just a useless idiot sitting on my floor. I let out a soft whimper, curling my shoulders inward like a frightened child. But beneath that cowardly posture, my mind was racing with absolute clarity. I knew that the micro camera hidden in the smoke detector was capturing every single word of her cruel mockery. Later that evening, the abuse escalated from verbal taunts to physical hostility. I shuffled along, my soul scraping against the hardwood, moving slowly past the fireplace mantel. In the center of the shelf sat a beautiful silver frame containing a photo of Martha and me on our 30th wedding anniversary. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and gently touched the cold glass of the frame. Suddenly, a sharp, blistering sting exploded across the back of my hand. The loud smack of skin meeting skin echoed through the quiet living room. Natalie had stepped up right behind me, swatting my hand away with rough force. My knuckles barked against the heavy brick of the fireplace, scraping the skin. "Don't touch that, you crazy old fool!" she spat, her eyes flashing with vicious anger. "You're going to break it with your clumsy hands. Go sit in your chair and stare at the wall where you belong." She grabbed me roughly by the shoulders, her fingernails digging painfully through the fabric of my sweater, and shoved me forcefully toward the leather recliner. I stumbled back with the momentum, letting my knees buckle so I collapsed clumsily into the chair. I held my stinging hand against my chest, letting out a pathetic, broken sob as I buried my face in my palms. It was the ultimate humiliation for a man who had spent his life providing for his family. But as I peeked through the spaces between my fingers, looking past her angry face, I stared directly at the small, decorative clock on the bookshelf. Right inside the number 12 on that clock face sat another hidden lens. The next morning brought the final piece of the undeniable puzzle. I shuffled into the kitchen at exactly 8 o'clock, playing the role of the compliant, broken old man. Natalie stood at the granite island, her back to me as she prepared my breakfast. I paused in the doorway, remaining completely silent, watching her reflection through the polished stainless steel surface of the double ovens. She reached into a bottom drawer and pulled out a heavy marble rolling pin. Right next to my steaming bowl of scrambled eggs sat the small plastic cup holding my blood pressure medication, and the 3 unmarked, highly toxic capsules Derek had procured. With a look of absolute chilling indifference, she took that heavy marble rolling pin and viciously crushed the white capsules right onto the granite countertop. She ground them into a fine dust, then used the edge of a knife blade to scrape the toxic powder directly into my food, stirring it thoroughly to hide the evidence. A sick, triumphant smile danced on her lips as she carried the toxic bowl toward me. She had absolutely no idea that the camera installed in the ceiling light fixture directly above her it just captured every single movement in breathtaking high definition. I waited until she turned around to load the dishwasher, grabbed the ceramic bowl, and silently scraped the toxic eggs into a small plastic baggie I kept hidden in my pocket. I smeared a tiny bit of yolk around the rim of the bowl and left it on the island. When Natalie turned around and saw the empty bowl, her fake, sickeningly sweet smile returned. She praised me like a dog that had performed a trick. I shuffled back to my bedroom, locking the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the mattress. I pulled the prepaid burn phone out from the floorboards beneath the bed. Just after noon, the screen lit up with a call from Garrett. I answered it on the first ring. "Did you get it?" I asked, my voice low and tight. "Yeah, I got it," Garrett replied. His voice was unusually heavy, even for a man who had seen the absolute worst of humanity. "Harrison, I had a contact at a private toxicology lab. Run those 3 white capsules you slipped me last night through a mass spectrometer. You might want to be sitting down for this." "I am sitting, Garrett. Tell me what my son has been feeding me." There was a long pause on the other line. The sound of Garrett taking a slow, deep breath crackled through the small speaker. "It's a medication called haloperidol," he finally said, delivering the clinical name with cold precision. "But it's an incredibly massive dose. We're talking 50 milligrams per capsule, Harrison. Those aren't vitamins. That's a chemical weapon." I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. What exactly does it do, Garrett? What is it prescribed for? Haloperidol is a high-potency, typical antipsychotic, Garrett explained, reading directly from the lab report. In very small, strictly monitored doses, it's used to treat severe schizophrenia or acute psychotic episodes. But giving a massive dose like this to a completely healthy 74-year-old man is basically a death sentence for your cognitive functions. It forcefully blocks the dopamine receptors in your brain. Within days of ingestion, a healthy person will start experiencing a severe loss of motor control. Your hands will shake uncontrollably. Your speech will become slurred and completely incoherent. You'll lose your short-term memory, become deeply confused by your surroundings, and just stare blankly into space. It mimics severe Alzheimer's disease, I whispered, the horrific reality clicking into place like the final tumbler of a lock. Exactly, Garrett confirmed, his voice laced with disgust. It creates a perfect, textbook case of rapid onset dementia. Any doctor who walks into that house and observes you under the influence of that chemical cocktail would instantly diagnose you as mentally incompetent. But that's not even the worst of it, Harrison. I closed my eyes, leaning against the cold bedroom wall to steady myself. Tell me, haloperidol isn't just a temporary sedative, Garrett continued. At the extreme dosages Natalie has been sneaking into your food, the effects aren't completely reversible. Prolonged exposure causes severe neurotoxicity. It starts systematically killing the neurons in your brain. If you were actually eating those poison meals every day, by the time Friday rolls around, you wouldn't just be acting like you have dementia. You would actually suffer permanent, irreversible brain damage. You would be trapped in a broken mind for the rest of your life, completely unable to care for yourself, unable to remember your own name, and entirely dependent on the very people who destroyed you. The phone line descended into absolute suffocating silence. The only sound left in the room was the heavy, raspy rattle of my own breath. I lowered the phone slightly, staring out the bedroom window at the gray, oppressive sky. My mind drifted back to the very day Derek was born. I remembered holding him in that sterile hospital room, looking down at his tiny, fragile hands, promising myself that I would protect him from the harshness of this world. I remembered working grueling 16-hour shifts in the freezing rain on muddy construction sites, scrimping and saving every spare dime just so he could attend a prestigious private university without a single penny of student loan, debt hanging over his head. I had given him my youth, my energy, and my hard-earned $5 million company. And in return, he was secretly feeding me a chemical compound explicitly engineered to dissolve my cognitive functions. He wasn't just stealing my money. That would have been simple greed. A thief takes your wallet and runs away. But Derek was doing something infinitely more sinister. He was actively, methodically erasing my very humanity. He wanted to trap me inside a living nightmare, reducing me to a drooling, senseless shell of a person, just so he could casually sign his name on my bank accounts and erase his criminal debts. The pure, calculated malice of his plan was almost too massive to fully comprehend. He had taken my wife's life to silence her, and now he was destroying my mind to claim my inheritance. "Harrison," Garrett's voice snapped me back from the edge of the dark abyss. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, Garrett," I replied, my voice disturbingly flat. It was the absolute calmness of a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. "We have everything we need," Garrett said. The kitchen camera caught her crushing the pills. The audio feed recorded Derek ordering her to double the dose. And now we have a toxicology report proving it's a lethal neurotoxic poison. This is premeditated attempted murder, Harrison. We can call the FBI right now. We can end this today. "No," I commanded softly. "If we arrest them now, Derek will hire the best defense attorneys in the state. He'll claim he bought the wrong supplements. He'll play the fool. He'll drag this out in court for years, and Detective Mitchell will likely catch wind of it and destroy the evidence from Martha's crash. We stick to the plan." "Are you absolutely certain you want to wait until Friday?" Garrett asked, the professional concern evident in his voice. "I am entirely certain," I replied. They want to put on a grand performance for that corrupt doctor. They want a big finale where I'm declared incompetent and they walk away with the prize. I'm going to give them their show, but I will be the one writing the final act. I hung up the phone and slid it back into its hiding spot beneath the floorboards. Standing up, I walked over to the full-length mirror hanging above the dresser and stared at my reflection. The exhausted, grieving widower was completely gone. In his place stood a man forged in the fires of ultimate betrayal. My son thought he was destroying my mind, but he had only succeeded in awakening a force he could never hope to defeat. There were exactly 3 days left until Friday, and hell was coming with me. Wednesday morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. I continued to play the part of the fading, heavily sedated old man, shuffling aimlessly from room to room and staring blankly out the windows. Natalie watched me with a gaze that held a sickening mixture of utter disdain and quiet triumph, fully convinced her chemical cocktail was working perfectly. Little did she know I was mapping out their downfall in real time. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, while Natalie was in the shower, the burner phone vibrated against my thigh. I slipped into the master bedroom, locked the heavy wooden door, and answered it. It was Garrett. His voice cut through the secure line, crackling with a tense electric energy. For the past 24 hours, he had been relentlessly hammering away at the firewall of Derek's home server. The USB drive we had planted in his computer hadn't just been copying files. It was actively sniffing out his keystrokes, hunting for the master password to his encrypted storage drives. Garrett told me the encryption was military grade, something Derek had purchased through his underground connections. But Garrett was a ghost in the machine, a man who had breached foreign intelligence servers during our time working with government agencies. I finally cracked the main vault, Garrett said, a rapid, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard echoing in the background. The keylogger caught him logging into a hidden administrator account late last night. Once I had the password, I bypassed the local network firewalls and established a secure remote tunnel straight into his hard drives. I am inside his entire digital life right now, Harrison, and what I'm looking at is absolutely staggering. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my eyes fixed on the floor. Tell me what's in there, Garrett. I need to know how deep this infection goes. A heavy silence fell over the line. Garrett let out a low, breathy whistle. It's a financial graveyard, he muttered. He's running a massive international money laundering operation. I'm looking at detailed spreadsheets documenting wire transfers to offshore accounts. He's set up dozens of shell companies, construction firms that have never built a single house, consulting agencies with 0 employees. They are all just empty fronts used to clean millions of dollars in illicit cash. And the worst part is how he funded the initial infrastructure. He used your family trust as the primary collateral to open offshore lines of credit. He drained my accounts to finance a criminal empire, I stated, feeling a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. Yes, Garrett confirmed. Every single time he suffered a loss, every time a shipment was seized or a deal went sideways, he pulled funds directly from your retirement accounts to cover his tracks and keep the collectors off his back. But he was smart about it. He never transferred the money directly into his personal bank. He routed it through a complex network of encrypted cryptocurrency wallets. I'm tracing the digital ledger right now. He converted your life savings into untraceable digital currency, bounced it across dozens of anonymous servers worldwide, and then deposited it into his hidden accounts. It's a financial labyrinth designed to baffle any standard forensic accountant. But Martha wasn't a standard accountant, I murmured. Exactly, Garrett said. She must have caught a tiny discrepancy in the initial withdrawal patterns and followed the thread all the way to the digital exchanges. That's why she was putting together that physical briefcase for the federal authorities. She had the paper bank statements proving the source of the initial seed money. Derek knew that if she handed those documents over, the authorities could easily subpoena the trading platforms and tear his entire digital fortress down to the ground. Keep digging, Garrett, I urged, my voice steady despite the absolute fury burning in my chest. If he's meticulous enough to build a network like this, he's meticulous enough to keep records of everything. Check the deleted files. Men like Derek always assume dragging a file to the trash means it's gone forever. They never realize the data remains on the physical drive until it's overwritten. You read my mind, Garrett replied. I'm running a deep recovery scan on the unallocated space of his hard drive right now. It's pulling huge amounts of processing power, but my rigs are chewing through it. I'm pulling up thousands of fragmented files. Old emails, encrypted chat logs, digital receipts for burner phones. It's like sifting through the ashes of a burned building. Wait, Garrett stopped talking. The rapid clicking of the keyboard abruptly ceased. The silence stretched out, heavy and expectant. Garrett? What is it? I pressed, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles texturized against the plastic. What did you find? Give me a second, he muttered, his voice sounding distant as if he were leaning closer to his monitor. He has a secondary hidden partition on the drive. It was masked as a corrupted system folder. I just bypassed the permissions. This is a completely isolated directory. There are no financial documents in here. There's just a single solitary folder hidden in the darkest corner of the drive. A cold sweat broke out across my neck. What's in the folder, Garrett? Tell me right now. I heard the distinct, soft click of a mouse. It's an audio file, Harrison, a single MP3 recording. The file is small, maybe 2 or 3 minutes max. But it's the file name that caught my eye. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped animal, desperately trying to break free. Read the name, I commanded, my voice dropping to a harsh, lethal whisper. I heard Garrett swallow hard over the line. The metadata shows it was created exactly 4 days before Martha's passing, he explained, his tone completely stripped of emotion, adopting the clinical detachment of a soldier delivering a casualty report. The file is titled mechanic_deposit. Play it, I ordered. The voice that left my mouth didn't even sound like my own anymore. It was a hollow, gravelly sound like wind scraping through an empty canyon. I pressed the phone hard against my ear, the plastic casing biting painfully into my skin. I needed to hear every single syllable. I needed that undeniable proof burned into my consciousness so that I would never, for the rest of my days, feel a single shred of mercy for the boy I had raised. I heard Garrett click his mouse. A sharp burst of static hissed through the small speaker, immediately followed by the heavy, rhythmic thrum of background noise. It sounded like an auto repair shop. I could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of a pneumatic drill and the clank of metal hitting metal. Then a voice cut through the industrial noise. It was Derek. His tone was casual, laced with a terrifying, arrogant detachment. Look, I don't care how you do it, Derek said, his voice crystal clear, despite the ambient noise. Just make sure it's absolutely untraceable. I'm paying you top dollar to keep this clean. A second voice grunted in response. It was raspy, heavy with the gravel of a lifetime of cheap cigarettes. It's a '98 Volvo, the mechanic replied. The undercarriage is practically rusted through anyway. It won't take much to make it look like a tragic structural failure. I can compromise the main hydraulic line. Once she hits the steep incline and pumps the pedal, the pressure will completely blow the seal. She won't have any braking power left. Perfect, Derek responded without a single hint of hesitation. He was discussing the assassination of his own mother, as carelessly as if he were ordering a cup of coffee. Cut the brake lines on the Volvo. Make it look like age and wear. My mother takes it up into the mountains every Sunday. Get it done. The recording clicked shut, leaving behind nothing but the dead, heavy silence of my locked bedroom. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. The device felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The strength entirely evaporated from my legs. I collapsed onto the edge of the mattress, my chest heaving violently as if the oxygen had been forcibly sucked out of the room. I tried to take a deep breath, but my throat closed up. A guttural, agonizing sound tore its way out of my lungs, a raw scream of absolute devastation that I had to smother by burying my face deep into a thick woolen pillow. The pain was physical. It felt like a jagged blade had been driven straight through my breastbone, twisting relentlessly. The son I had built an empire for, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the child I had taught to fish in the quiet waters of Lake Sinclair, had cold-bloodedly ordered the termination of the woman who gave him life, all for a few handfuls of digital currency. Martha had loved him with an endless, fierce grace. She had baked him his favorite chocolate cake for his 40th birthday just a few years ago. She had framed his college diploma and hung it proudly in our hallway, and he had sent her down a mountain road, knowing exactly how terrified she would be in her final moments, desperately pumping a dead brake pedal as her car plunged toward the jagged rocks below. My mind flashed with images of her face, her warm smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed at my terrible jokes. I pictured her final seconds of pure terror, the devastating impact, the tearing of metal, the absolute darkness that followed. And I knew that when Derek received the phone call from the police department, he had likely been smiling. I threw the pillow across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud. My hands began to shake, not the fake, tremulous shake of a drugged old man, but a violent, volcanic fury that consumed every remaining shred of grief inside me. The tears stopped falling. The sorrow evaporated. In its place, a dark, terrifying clarity settled over me. I stood up from the bed. Walking over to the closet, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror attached to the door. My eyes were red and swollen, but they were hard, cold, and entirely unforgiving. I picked up the phone again. Garrett was still on the line, maintaining a respectful, heavy silence. He knew what I was going through. He knew that no comforting words could possibly heal the wound of a father who had been so completely betrayed. "Harrison," Garrett finally whispered, his voice gruff with sorrow. "I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry." I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the icy resolve lock into place. "Don't be sorry, Garrett," I replied. My voice was completely level now. The shaking was gone. The hesitation was entirely erased. "Secure that audio file. Back it up on 3 different servers. Print out the bank statements showing the payment he made to that mechanic. Print the offshore accounts, the crypto ledgers, everything. I want a mountain of physical evidence ready by tomorrow night." "Are we still waiting for the doctor on Friday?" Garrett asked, practically eager to tear the house down right now. "Yes," I answered, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "They want to play a game of deception. They want to trap me in a corner and strip away everything I own. But the gloves are completely off now. He crossed a line there is no returning from. I'm not just going to put my son in prison. I'm going to dismantle him entirely. I am going to take his freedom, his wife, his dignity, and his false reputation. I am going to reduce his entire life to ash. Friday is Judgment Day, and I am going to be the judge, the jury, and the absolute executioner. He is going to pay for this." Thursday arrived wrapped in a suffocating tension. The air inside the house felt incredibly heavy, as if it had been poisoned by the ugly secrets festering within the walls. I spent the entire day confined to the living room recliner, wrapped in a thick woven blanket, staring blankly at the muted television screen. My performance had to be absolutely flawless now. I let my head tilt slightly to one side, keeping my mouth open just a fraction of an inch. Natalie passed by me several times, casting disparaging glances my way. She didn't even bother to mask her contempt anymore. At lunch, she brought me a bowl of lukewarm soup, casually stirring the crushed sedative into the broth, right in front of my face, entirely confident that I was too far gone to comprehend what she was doing. I simply offered her a hollow, vacant grin, and the moment she stepped away to take a phone call, I carefully poured the bitter liquid into the Ziploc bag hidden beneath my blanket. I was a man trapped behind enemy lines, surrounded by hostile forces, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows across the hardwood floor, Derek returned home from his office. He didn't acknowledge me. He strode straight past my chair, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway as he headed directly for the liquor cabinet. Just after 8 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rang. Natalie rushed to answer it, her voice dropping into a hushed, conspiratorial whisper. I recognized the heavy, authoritative thud of the boots stepping into the foyer. It was Detective Mitchell, the very man who had stood at my wife's freshly dug grave and lied straight to my face. I sat motionless in my chair, regulating my breathing, keeping my eyes glued to the TV screen. They moved through the living room and stepped into Derek's private study. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. I waited exactly 3 minutes to ensure they were settled. Then, with the silent, practiced stealth of a ghost, I slid out of the recliner and crept up the stairs back to my locked bedroom. Pulling the burner phone from beneath the floorboards, I plugged in a pair of cheap wired headphones and connected to the secure audio stream Garrett had established. The microphone hidden inside the HVAC vent in Derek's office picked up their conversation with terrifying clarity. I heard the clink of ice against crystal glasses, followed by the sound of expensive scotch being poured. "Everything is taken care of on my end, then," Detective Mitchell said, his voice deep and rumbling, stripped of the professional restraint he used when wearing his uniform in public. "The paperwork for the accidental death ruling has been permanently filed in the county archives. Nobody is ever going to reopen that case. I give you my absolute word on that." "I appreciate it, Mitchell," Derek replied, his tone smooth and entirely unrepentant. "The second half of your payment will hit your offshore account first thing Monday morning. But right now we need to focus on the final phase of this operation. Tomorrow is the critical day. We can't afford even a single mistake." Mitchell grunted in agreement. "Tell me exactly how this is going to go down. I'm putting my badge on the line by showing up here tomorrow. If the old man fights back or the neighbors hear him screaming, things could get incredibly messy very quickly." "He won't fight back," Natalie interjected, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "I've been pumping him full of that high-dose antipsychotic all week. His brain is completely fried. He can barely remember how to hold a spoon anymore, let alone organize any kind of physical resistance. He's nothing but a drooling vegetable right now." "Even so," Derek interrupted, "we have to ensure the legal framework is absolutely ironclad. That's why the doctor is arriving tomorrow at exactly 4 p.m. I paid top dollar for a psychiatrist who understands discretion. He has a record of signing expedited involuntary commitment forms for wealthy families who want to quietly handle problematic relatives. He'll perform a brief, superficial evaluation. Once he sees the symptoms the old man is exhibiting, he'll officially declare him an immediate physical danger to himself and others." I listened to my son calmly detailing the blueprint for my destruction, my hands curling into tight fists. "Once the doctor signs off on the medical evaluation," Derek continued, "that comprehensive power of attorney becomes fully active. I will have total, unchallenged legal control over his medical decisions, his physical property, and the entire $6 million family trust. Then the private medical transport team arrives at the back door. They'll strap him to a gurney and take him straight to the secure ward at Oak Ridge Psychiatric Hospital." "And what's my role in this grand performance?" Mitchell asked, his glass clinking against the table to punctuate his sentence. "You're my insurance policy," Derek said coldly. "You'll arrive at 3:45, just before the doctor gets here. You need to be in full uniform. Your presence will provide the official police authority needed for an involuntary transfer. If the medical transport team has any hesitation, or if the old man has a sudden moment of clarity and tries to resist, you're there to authorize the use of physical restraints. If anyone asks, you tell them you were responding to a distress call regarding a violent dementia patient. You make sure he gets into that vehicle quietly, and you make sure the neighbors don't ask any questions." Mitchell let out a low chuckle. "It's a ruthless play, Derek. I have to hand it to you. Locking your own father away in a padded cell just to get your hands on his checkbook. Don't you feel even a tiny bit of guilt about it?" A brief silence hung over the audio feed. I held my breath, waiting for the answer, foolishly hoping to hear even a shred of hesitation from the boy I had raised. "He had his time in the sun," Derek finally responded, his voice completely devoid of any human warmth. "But he's an old dinosaur, Mitchell. He's sitting on a mountain of wealth while my business is suffocating. I'm just accelerating the natural order of things. By tomorrow night, he'll be locked in a room where nobody will ever listen to him again, and I'll be a very wealthy man. Now, finish your drink. We have a big day tomorrow." The audio feed cut out, dissolving into a low hiss of static. I pulled the headphones out, letting them drop onto the floor. The darkness in the bedroom felt heavy, but at the same time, it was remarkably clear. It was Thursday night. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked its eerie green numbers, marking the steady passage of time. I had less than 24 hours to prepare the ultimate counterstrike against the two people I had once loved. My son was entirely convinced he was sending me to a living hell, but he had absolutely no idea that I had already built his. Friday morning dawned with a deceptive tranquility. The storm that had raged for days had finally passed, leaving behind a pale, washed-out sky that offered no real warmth. I lay in bed, staring at the patterns on the plaster ceiling, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the day pressing down on my chest. This was it. This was the culmination of 48 years of marriage, decades of hard work, and a lifetime of being a father, all coming down to one brutal afternoon. I rolled out of bed carefully, my joints popping in the quiet room. Before I changed out of my pajamas, I reached into the hidden seam of my travel bag. Garrett had left me a parting gift during his secret visit. It was a micro earpiece, no larger than a grain of rice, designed for deep cover operations. I pushed it deep into my right ear canal until it was entirely invisible to the naked eye. I tapped the micro transmitter taped to my ribs twice. A faint hiss of static crackled in my ear, immediately followed by Garrett's steady, reassuring voice. "I've got your audio, Harrison," Garrett whispered. "Testing 1, 2. Can you hear me clearly?" I let out a single cough to confirm. "Excellent," Garrett continued. "The perimeter is fully established. I've got 2 unmarked surveillance vans parked at either end of the street. We've got eyes on the front and back of your property. I'm sitting right here with Agent Vance from the FBI. He's reviewed the audio file of your son ordering the hit on Martha, along with the offshore bank records and the toxicology reports. They are treating this as an active, high-priority apprehension. They are just waiting for my signal to move in. Victor is safe in federal protective custody right now. You are not alone in this fight, my friend. Just play the part a little longer." I took a slow, deep breath, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. Ruffling my hair and pulling one side of my shirt out, I shuffled out of the bedroom, dragging my left foot slightly to complete the illusion of a man whose nervous system was actively failing. I walked into the kitchen. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, serving as a cruel reminder of the mornings Martha and I used to share, reading the newspaper together at the island. Natalie was already dressed, wearing a sharp, professional black dress. She was treating today like a formal business transaction. She didn't even look up from her phone when I walked in. I slumped into my chair, letting my head hang forward. A few minutes later, she set a piece of dry toast and a glass of water in front of my face. She hadn't added any medication to it this morning. She clearly believed the accumulated dosage was already sufficient to achieve the desired effect. "Eat it and stay quiet," she muttered, her fingers typing furiously across her screen. She was likely texting the transport team, finalizing the logistics of the kidnapping that was about to take place. I stared blankly at the toast, letting a small trickle of saliva gather at the corner of my mouth. I had to make this absolutely authentic. Around noon, Derek finally emerged from his office. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his hair immaculate. He looked like a man preparing to accept an award. Walking into the kitchen, he poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the granite countertop, studying me with a look of clinical detachment. He watched me for a long time, sipping his coffee, his eyes tracking my vacant, unblinking stare. I didn't react. I kept my focus entirely on the intricate grain of the wooden table, slowing my breathing, ignoring his presence completely. Setting his mug down, Derek walked slowly over to my chair. He crouched down, bringing his face level with mine. I could smell the sharp scent of expensive mints on his breath. He reached out and condescendingly patted my cheek, his fingers cold against my skin. "Don't worry, old man," Derek whispered, a cold, victorious smile spreading across his face. "You're going to a nice, comfortable, padded room soon, and I'm going to take real good care of your money. You worked so hard your whole life, but you just don't have the brains to manage it anymore. It's time for you to rest. I'll make sure the doctors keep you well medicated. You won't even know you're locked away. It'll just be like a long, peaceful sleep." He gave my cheek one final pat, stood up, and walked out of the room, whistling a cheerful tune. My hands remained completely still in my lap, but inside my mind, a raging inferno of hatred roared to life. I wanted to leap from the chair, wrap my hands around that arrogant killer's throat, and squeeze until that smile was permanently erased from his face. I wanted to confront him, to ask him how he could possibly look me in the eye knowing he had destroyed his own mother for a few digital tokens. But I held my ground. I suppressed my fury with the iron discipline of a soldier. Every second I maintained this charade was another nail driven into his coffin. Through that earpiece I heard Garrett's voice cut through the dark thoughts. "Steady, Harrison," Garrett murmured, his tone tight with suppressed anger. I caught what he said through the living room microphone. "The federal agents in the van are practically foaming at the mouth. We have enough evidence to put him away for 3 lifetimes. Just let the trap snap completely shut. We need that corrupt doctor and the detective in the room. We want the entire network in one clean sweep." I tapped the micro-transmitter taped to my ribs twice, a silent acknowledgement that I understood the entire operation. The afternoon hours stretched out with an agonizing slowness. Every single tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. The house was dead silent, yet heavy with a sickening layer of anticipation. Natalie paced back and forth across the hardwood, fluffing the throw pillows on the sofa and arranging a tray of water glasses, setting the stage for the guests who were about to arrive. She was actively setting the scene for my legal execution. I sat in the recliner for hours without moving a single muscle, like a ghost haunting my own home. I watched the dust motes dancing in the streams of sunlight cutting through the living room windows. My mind drifted back to the sheer amount of love that had been poured into building this space. Martha had picked out those heavy velvet curtains herself. She was the one who chose the warm amber stain on the hardwood flooring. She had poured her entire soul into creating a true sanctuary for our family, a place that was supposed to be safe and filled with warmth. And now, the very son she brought into this world was using her sanctuary as the staging ground for a calculated, cold-blooded betrayal. The sheer juxtaposition of this beautiful setting and the grotesque malice unfolding within it was almost too much to bear. It took a massive effort of sheer willpower to keep my face completely slack, ensuring my eyes didn't betray the sharp, burning awareness currently tracking every micro-movement in the house. By 2 p.m., Derek began organizing documents on the coffee table. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He laid out the thick, multi-page medical evaluation forms, the paperwork that the corrupt psychiatrist was scheduled to sign. Right next to them, he placed the comprehensive financial power of attorney, the exact document that would legally strip away my identity, my property, and my life savings. He smoothed the papers down with a terrifying reverence, checking his gold watch every few minutes. He was practically vibrating with greed. The sheer audacity of his plan was astounding. He truly believed he had thought of every single variable. He believed he had outsmarted the police, bypassed the auditors, and successfully incapacitated his own father. Garrett's voice crackled into my ear again, low and urgent. "Target 1 is approaching. Detective Mitchell just turned down your street in his marked unit. He's parking 2 houses down to keep a low profile. He's walking toward your front door right now." I didn't move a single muscle. My gaze remained locked onto a blank spot on the wall. The doorbell rang, a cheerful sound that felt completely out of place given the circumstances. Derek strode toward the door with absolute confidence, swinging it open. Mitchell stepped inside, the heavy thud of his duty boots echoing across the floor. He was in full uniform, his brass badge catching the afternoon light. He looked around the foyer, his hand resting casually on his tactical belt. "Is the package ready?" Mitchell asked, his voice low and raspy. Derek smiled, gesturing back toward where I sat slumped in the recliner. "He's completely docile," Derek assured him. "The medication has him totally compliant. Once the doctor gets here, we'll run through the questions quickly, sign the paperwork, and the transport team will load him up. You just stand by the door and look official." Mitchell walked over, standing directly in front of me, looking down with a hint of mild disgust. He waved a hand in front of my face. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I stared right through his chest. "He's completely gone," Mitchell muttered. It's almost sad to watch. Hearing that man pity me, the very man who had covered up the crime against my wife, caused a cold, hard smile to form in the deepest, darkest corner of my mind. It was 3:45 p.m. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the stench of corruption and imminent victory. They truly believed the game was already won. They thought I was just a broken, brainless obstacle that they had successfully cleared from the path. But they had absolutely no idea that this house was completely wired. They had no idea that federal agents were down the street, monitoring their every move. The calm before the storm was finally over. The sky outside the window was darkening, and I was entirely prepared to bring the thunder. Right at 4 p.m. sharp, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the silent house. Derek moved quickly across the foyer to open it. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped inside, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He had immaculate, slicked-back silver hair and wore an expensive pair of gold wire-rimmed glasses. This was Dr. Eris Thorne, the corrupt psychiatrist Derek had paid off to deliver my final judgment. He didn't look like a man who locked innocent people away in padded rooms for a profit. He looked like a highly respected pillar of the medical community. Derek shook his hand warmly, thanking him for making the trip on such short notice. Natalie hovered nearby, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the exhausted, grieving caregiver to absolute perfection. Detective Mitchell remained stationed near the front door, his arms crossed over his chest, his radio letting out a faint burst of static. The entire cast of my destruction was finally gathered under one roof. Dr. Thorne walked into the living room and took a seat on the velvet sofa, directly facing my recliner. He popped open his briefcase with a sharp, metallic click, pulling out a thick file and a silver pen. Crossing his legs, he rested the folder on his knee and turned his attention to me, his face shifting into a look of highly practiced, manufactured sympathy. "Harrison," he said, his voice incredibly smooth and soothing, "I'm Dr. Thorne. Your family called me here today because they are very concerned about your well-being. They tell me you've been struggling lately, forgetting things, acting a bit confused. Can you tell me how you're feeling today?" I let my head tilt to the side, my chin dropping toward my collarbone. I parted my lips, letting out shallow, ragged breaths. I stared blankly at the cuff of the doctor's expensive suit, keeping my eyes completely out of focus. When I didn't respond, the doctor leaned forward, adopting a slower, louder cadence, as if speaking to a young child. "Harrison, can you tell me what day of the week it is? Can you tell me the name of the president?" I let out a low, guttural groan, letting a thin stream of saliva escape the corner of my mouth and drip down my chin. I raised my right hand, letting it tremble violently as I clawed uselessly at the air, as if trying to swat an invisible insect. I mumbled a string of completely incoherent syllables, ensuring my voice cracked and faded into a pathetic whimper. Natalie stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the doctor's shoulder. "It breaks my heart to see him like this," she whispered, her voice shaking with manufactured grief. "He's deteriorated so rapidly since Martha passed away. He doesn't even recognize us anymore. He wanders around the house at night. We're so terrified he's going to leave the stove on or wander into the street. We just can't provide the around-the-clock care he desperately needs." Dr. Thorne nodded solemnly, making a brief, perfunctory note on his legal pad. "This is a tragic but very common presentation in cases of severe trauma among the elderly," he stated, his tone clinical and entirely devoid of actual emotion. "The shock of losing a spouse often triggers a latent, neurodegenerative cascade. Given the extreme lack of motor control, the aphasia, and the complete detachment from current reality, it is my professional medical opinion that he poses an immediate and severe danger to his own safety. He is entirely incapable of making rational decisions regarding his health care or his financial estate." Derek let out a loud, heavy sigh of relief, rubbing his face to simulate the immense burden of a loving son making a difficult decision. "So, you agree that an involuntary placement is the only safe option left for him?" Derek asked, a note of false hesitation coloring his words. "I absolutely do," Dr. Thorne confirmed without a second thought. "It is the most merciful course of action for everyone involved. He will be safe in our secure facility. He will be under 24-hour observation, and you can rest easy, knowing he cannot bring harm to himself. Derek reached across the coffee table and picked up the thick stack of legal documents, the paperwork that would end my life as a free man. He handed them across the table to the psychiatrist. The top page was the medical evaluation order, and right beneath it was the comprehensive financial power of attorney. "If you could just sign on the dotted line," Derek said, unable to hide the trembling anticipation in his voice. "Once you sign off on these, the transport team waiting in the van just around the corner can come in and secure him immediately." A heavy silence settled over the room. The only sounds were the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and the faint crackle of Detective Mitchell's radio near the front door. Dr. Thorne took the documents, laying them flat across his leather briefcase. He uncapped his silver pen, the tip catching the pale afternoon light filtering through the living room windows. He scanned the printed text quickly, verifying that Derek's legal team had drafted the terms exactly to his specific requirements. He nodded in approval. Derek took a step forward, his eyes hungrily locked onto the tip of the pen. Natalie held her breath, her hands clasped tightly against her chest. Mitchell shifted his weight, his hand resting on his duty belt, ready to step in if I somehow found the strength to resist the transport team. The silver pen hovered just a fraction of an inch above the crisp white paper. The trap was laid perfectly. The bait had been taken. Right at the exact millisecond that dark ink was about to hit the paper fibers, I snapped myself completely upright in my chair, my spine popping with a terrifying rigidity as my eyes locked onto Derek's face with absolute piercing clarity. Before the ink could even touch the paper, I shattered the illusion. I threw off the heavy woven blanket that had been draped over my shoulders like a shroud. My spine aligned with a satisfying crack. The slack, drooling expression I had meticulously maintained for days vanished in a single microsecond, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp and authoritative glare. With a completely steady hand, I wiped the pathetic trace of saliva from my chin. I took a deep, full breath, filling my lungs completely for what felt like the first time in an eternity. The suffocating fog of the victim was gone. The architect had returned. I was no longer the prey. "Before you sign that name, Dr. Thorne, you might want to look at the screen," I commanded. My voice didn't shake. It didn't crack. It was a deep, rumbling, authoritative baritone, the voice of a man who had commanded massive construction crews and built towering skyscrapers of steel. It was a voice that demanded absolute, unquestioning obedience. The effect on the room was immediate and utterly catastrophic. Dr. Thorne flinched violently, his hand jerking back as if the white paper had suddenly caught fire. The expensive silver pen clattered loudly onto the glass surface of the coffee table, leaving a dark, jagged streak of ink across the fraudulent legal documents. The paperwork was ruined. Natalie let out a sharp gasp, a choking sound of pure terror, and stumbled back a step. She slammed both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at me with the absolute horror of someone who had just seen a ghost rise from the grave. Derek froze entirely. The smug, greedy smile that had been plastered across his face just seconds ago dissolved completely, leaving behind a pale, bloodless mask of sheer panic. He stood rooted to the hardwood floor, his jaw working silently, completely unable to process the impossible reality unfolding right in front of him. Detective Mitchell instinctively dropped his heavy hand to the holster of his service weapon, his police training kicking in even though he had absolutely no idea what kind of threat he was supposed to be facing in this quiet living room. "What on earth is going on here?" Dr. Thorne stammered, his professional composure fracturing into a million jagged pieces. He looked frantically back and forth between me and Derek, his silver hair suddenly looking unkempt. "You explicitly told me he was completely incapacitated." "He's having a lucid episode," Derek blurted out, his voice climbing an octave as he desperately tried to regain control of his rapidly collapsing narrative. "This happens sometimes with advanced dementia patients. They get a sudden, unpredictable burst of clarity before they crash again. Ignore whatever he's saying and just sign the paperwork. Please, doctor, we need to get this done now. We can't wait. I reached slowly into my pants pocket and pulled out the small, black remote control for the massive 85-inch television mounted directly above the brick fireplace. My eyes never left my trembling son. "You got one thing right, Derek," I said, each word dripping with absolute freezing venom. "I'm having a moment of profound clarity. In fact, I've never seen things more clearly in my entire life." I pressed the red power button. The heavy black screen on the wall flickered with a faint hum of electricity, snapping to life instantly. I pressed a second button, immediately syncing the television to the secure wireless server Garrett was operating from the surveillance van down the street. The massive screen lit up, casting a harsh, glaring white light across the terrified faces gathered in my living room. The image that appeared was crystal clear, high-definition video footage captured just 2 days prior. It was a perfect, unobstructed view looking down at the granite kitchen island. A dead, haunting silence fell over the room as the video began to play. There, larger than life on the screen, was Natalie. She was humming a cheerful little pop tune, holding a heavy marble rolling pin in her right hand. Next to her sat the steaming bowl of my breakfast, along with a small plastic cup holding 3 unmarked white capsules. The evidence was right there. The hidden microphone spliced into the ceiling smoke detector picked up the audio perfectly, the sound of her humming echoing loudly through the living room's premium surround sound speakers. Everyone watched in paralyzed, sickening shock as the digital version of my daughter-in-law casually took the 3 capsules, smashed them brutally beneath the marble rolling pin, and ground them into a fine powder. Then her recorded voice boomed from the television, cruel and dripping with pure malice. "Oh, you are completely gone, aren't you?" The voice sneered. "You are an absolute pathetic waste. Spent your whole life building buildings and making money, and now you're just a useless idiot sitting on my floor." The video showed her scraping the toxic white powder directly into my breakfast, stirring it vigorously with a silver spoon to hide the deadly evidence. Then the footage seamlessly cut to a second clip. This one was taken from the micro camera hidden inside the living room clock. It showed me weakly reaching for the framed photo of Martha on the mantel, followed by Natalie storming across the room, swatting my hand away with rough force and shoving me violently down into the leather recliner. "Don't touch that, you crazy old fool!" her recorded voice screamed at maximum volume. I clicked the remote, freezing the frame on Natalie's twisted, furious face. The silence that followed in the living room was heavy and suffocating. I turned my attention back to the corrupt psychiatrist, who was now visibly shaking, all the color completely drained from his face. He stared at the television screen with a look of absolute, undeniable terror. "The white powder she was putting into my food, Dr. Thorne, was a medication called haloperidol," I stated clearly, my voice ringing through the quiet room like a bell. "She was deliberately feeding me 50 milligrams every single day. Tell me, doctor, in your professional medical opinion, what happens when you give a massive dose of an unprescribed, high-potency antipsychotic to a completely healthy 74-year-old man? You were just about to sign a document declaring me insane, based entirely on the artificial symptoms my son paid to have induced in me. You are standing right in the center of a massive federal crime scene, and you are currently holding the weapon in your hand." The truth was finally out in the open, and the walls were closing in on them. There was nowhere left to run. Derek suddenly broke his paralyzed stance, letting out a loud, animalistic roar. His face twisted into a grotesque mask of sheer desperation as he lunged across the living room carpet. He threw himself toward the massive brick fireplace, completely abandoning any remnant of the sophisticated son he had been playing just minutes before. He clawed frantically at the cables hidden behind the flat-screen television, desperately trying to rip the power cords from the wall to force the room back into darkness. His manicured nails scraped against the rough brick, tearing the skin, but he didn't feel the pain. He was like a cornered rat now, trying to chew his way out of a trap. "Turn it off!" he shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched scream. "Turn that damn thing off right now, you stupid old man, you don't know what you're doing." I didn't move an inch from the leather recliner. I simply watched his pathetic struggle with the detached observation of a judge presiding over a final sentencing. My thumb rested on the remote control in my hand. "You're right about one thing, Derek," I said, raising my voice effortlessly above his frantic screaming. "I was an old fool. I was foolish enough to believe you loved your mother. I was foolish enough to think there was a single shred of human decency left in your soul. But my eyes are completely open now." I pressed the next button on the remote. The video of Natalie vanished from the massive screen instantly. The display shifted to a solid, pitch-black background. The silence in the room was only brief. A sharp burst of static hissed through the premium surround sound speakers, vibrating the floorboards beneath our feet. And then the undeniable recording began to play. The rhythmic thrum of the auto repair shop filled my living room. I watched Derek freeze, his hands desperately tangled in the television cables. His entire body went rigid as his own voice echoed off the walls. "Look, I don't care how you do it," the digital version of my son said carelessly. "Just make sure it's absolutely untraceable. I'm paying you top dollar to keep this clean." The mechanic's raspy voice answered, detailing exactly how he would compromise the hydraulic lines on my wife's 1998 Volvo. He explained how the pressure would blow the seal on the steep incline. And then the final, unforgivable nail was driven into the coffin. "Cut the brake lines on the Volvo," Derek's recorded voice commanded with absolute chilling indifference. "Make it look like age and wear. My mother takes it up into the mountains every Sunday. Get it done." The audio clicked off, leaving a deafening, echoing void. Dr. Thorne stumbled backward, collapsing onto the edge of the velvet sofa, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Natalie dropped to her knees on the floor, burying her face in her hands, as a sob of pure terror escaped her. She finally understood the full horror of the monster she had married. But Detective Mitchell didn't cry. He realized in an instant that he was trapped in a room playing a confession, and his corruption was directly tied to the victim. Panic seized his mind. He took a swift step back, his hand falling instinctively to his duty belt. His fingers unsnapped the retention strap of his holster, gripping the textured handle of his service weapon. "Don't even think about pulling that gun, Mitchell," I warned, my voice cutting through the tension like a sharpened blade. But the corrupt detective was too far gone in his panic. He began to draw the heavy black pistol from its holster, prepared to terminate his way out of this mansion to escape the devastating consequences of his greed. He never even got the chance to raise the barrel. A deafening, explosive crash shattered the afternoon quiet. The solid wood front door of my home was violently kicked, completely off its brass hinges. It splintered inward, crashing down onto the marble foyer floor with a thunderous boom. Simultaneously, the reinforced glass of the back patio doors shattered into a million glittering pieces as a battering ram smashed through the frame. The house was instantly flooded with heavily armed tactical personnel. They poured into the living room from both directions, a highly coordinated wave of black body armor, ballistic helmets, and raised assault rifles. Leading the charge at the very front of the stack was Garrett Cole. He moved with the lethal grace of a veteran who had mastered the art of the ambush over a lifetime. He wasn't wearing an FBI trench coat, but the agents flanking him on either side were unquestionably taking his lead. "FBI!" a commanding voice roared through the chaos. "Drop the weapon right now! Get your hands up! Down on the ground!" Mitchell hesitated for a fatal second, his eyes wide with shock as red laser sights painted his chest. Garrett didn't wait for the corrupt cop to make up his mind. He closed the distance in 2 steps, grabbing Mitchell's wrist and wrenching it upward with brutal force. The service weapon clattered harmlessly onto the hardwood floor. Garrett kicked the gun across the room, slamming Mitchell hard against the drywall and kicking his legs apart. The sharp click of steel handcuffs locking around Mitchell's wrists was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Across the room, 2 federal agents tackled Derek to the floor. My son didn't fight back. He simply collapsed onto the rug he had purchased with my stolen funds, curling into a pathetic ball as the agents yanked his arms behind his back. Natalie was sobbing hysterically, surrounded by officers ordering her down onto the floor. I remained seated in my leather recliner, watching the flawless execution of absolute justice. My heart maintained a steady, level rhythm. The storm had finally broken, and I was the only one left standing. The living room was now a symphony of chaotic federal authority. Tactical agents moved with heavy boots across the hardwood, their radios crackling with short, efficient commands. Detective Mitchell was the first to be dragged out. Two burly agents hauled him up, his uniform disheveled, his badge ripped from his chest. He didn't say a single word. He didn't look at me. He just kept his eyes fixed on the floor, the brutal reality of his ruined life finally settling in. He knew the federal prison system held absolutely zero mercy for corrupt cops who assisted in the termination of innocent women. They pushed him out through the shattered front entrance and into the blinding emergency lights that now completely flooded my quiet street. With the corrupt detective cleared out, the room's focus shifted to the remaining conspirators. Dr. Thorne, the prominent psychiatrist who just minutes ago had been so eager to lock me away, was desperately trying to talk his way out of the nightmare. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, backing away from the advancing federal agents, his voice trembling as he spoke. "This is a terrible misunderstanding," Dr. Thorne pleaded. "I had absolutely no knowledge of this. I was simply called here for a standard medical consultation. I am a licensed medical professional." Garrett stepped forward, his expression looking as if it had been carved from solid granite. "You were hired to rubber stamp a fraudulent diagnosis for a financial conspiracy, Doctor," Garrett stated loudly. "We have the wire transfers from Derek's offshore accounts going directly into your private practice. You aren't a doctor anymore. You're a co-conspirator in a federal fraud and elder abuse case. Put your hands behind your back." The doctor let out a pathetic whimper, offering zero physical resistance as the cold steel cuffed his wrists tightly. They marched him out, leaving only my daughter-in-law and my son. Natalie had completely lost her mind. The sophisticated, cruel woman who had roughly swatted my hand away and mocked my fake dementia was entirely gone. In her place was a terrified, hysterical mess. As two agents pulled her up, she began to struggle wildly, tears streaking through her ruined makeup. She turned her panicked, desperate eyes toward Derek, who was still pinned to the rug. "It was all his fault," Natalie screamed, her voice tearing through the room. She pointed a shaking finger at her husband. "He made me do it. He's the one who bought the pills. He told me to put them in the food. I didn't know anything about the car crash. I swear to God, I didn't know he killed Martha. He told me he was just trying to get the money to pay back the lenders. You have to believe me, Harrison. Tell them I didn't know about Martha." I looked at her, my face completely expressionless. "You willingly fed neurotoxic poison to a man you believed was completely defenseless, Natalie," I replied, my voice level and unforgiving. "And you smiled while you did it. You are going exactly where you deserve to go." She let out a piercing wail of pure despair as the agents dragged her from the room, her cries fading into the chaotic noise of the front lawn. And then there was only Derek. The federal agents pulled him slowly from the floor, securing his hands tightly behind his back. The tailored navy suit he had worn to celebrate his ultimate victory was now covered in dust, wrinkled and ruined. He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically from corner to corner, searching for any possible loophole, an escape route that simply did not exist. The digital fortress he had built was completely breached. The cop he had bought off was in handcuffs. The wife who had helped him had turned on him. He was completely, utterly isolated. As the agents began to guide him toward the door, Derek suddenly dug his expensive leather heels into the hardwood floor. With a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, he fought against the officer's grip. He threw his weight forward, just enough to break free from their hold, and stumbled across the room, collapsing violently to his knees, right beside my leather recliner. He pitched his upper body forward, his handcuffed hands useless behind his back, and pressed his tear-stained face right against my lap. He was weeping openly now, loud, ugly, gasping sobs that shuddered through his entire frame. "Dad, please," Derek begged, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "Please, you have to stop them. Tell them to stop. I'm your son. I'm your only boy. You can't let them take me to prison. I'll give everything back. I'll sign the trust back to you today. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it." Please, Dad. I was just so scared of the people I owed money to. They were going to kill me. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but you can fix it. You always fix things for me. Don't do this to me." I sat in my chair, looking down at the top of his perfectly styled head. I felt his tears soaking through the fabric of my trousers. 42 years ago, I had held this boy in my arms and promised to protect him from the world. I had worked myself to the bone just to provide him with a life of privilege and comfort. I had sold the company I built with my bare hands just to rescue him from his own failures. And in return for a lifetime of unconditional love, he had taken the life of the woman who birthed him and attempted to dissolve my mind. I reached down slowly, placing my hand firmly on his shoulder. For a fraction of a second, he stopped weeping. He looked up at me, a pathetic glimmer of desperate hope shining in his bloodshot eyes. He actually believed that even after everything he had done, my love for him was still a weakness he could exploit one last time. He thought the father who had always bailed him out would rescue him from the abyss once again. I looked straight into his eyes, stripping away every single ounce of warmth, every remnant of paternal love I had ever held for him. My expression was one of absolute, terrifying nothingness. "You stopped being my son the day you severed the lines on your mother's car," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Enjoy your time in hell." The faint light of hope in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, suffocating despair. The federal agent stepped forward, grabbing him roughly by the shoulders and hauling him to his feet. He didn't fight them this time. His legs completely gave out, and they practically dragged him backward across the room. He kept his eyes locked onto me the entire way, his mouth moving silently like a broken, defeated monster being led to the slaughter. I watched them pull him through the shattered doorway and out into the cold, unforgiving light of the afternoon. And suddenly, the house fell into a deep, profound silence. I was completely alone, but finally truly free. The quiet that settled over my house that afternoon wasn't a heavy, suffocating silence of the grave. It was a clear, pure stillness, the kind that only comes when the slate has been wiped completely clean. Over the next 6 months, the wheels of justice turned with a speed and ruthlessness that surprised even me. The mountain of digital and physical evidence that Garrett and the federal agents had compiled was absolutely insurmountable. There was no lengthy trial, no dramatic courtroom performance, and no clever defense attorney could miraculously explain away the horrific crimes caught on video and audio. The digital ledgers of the offshore accounts, the toxicology reports from the poison food, and the recorded confessions painted a picture of premeditated malice that left the judges thoroughly appalled. It was a complete victory, but it came at a devastating cost. When the day of final sentencing arrived, I sat in the front row of the federal courtroom, wearing the exact same dark suit I had worn to my wife's funeral. Derek stood before the judge, dressed in a bright orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to his waist. He looked frail, his once immaculate hair now thin and unkempt. The judge didn't mince words. She looked down at him with deep disgust and delivered the maximum penalty allowed by law. For the orchestrated termination of his own mother and the attempted destruction of his father, Derek Ward was sentenced to life in a maximum security federal prison without the possibility of parole. He didn't turn his head to look at me as the marshals led him away. His eyes remained fixed on the floor, finally understanding that his arrogance had cost him his entire existence. He will never breathe free air again, and in that quiet moment I felt the heavy burden of the past completely lift from my tired shoulders. Natalie didn't fare any better. Despite her desperate attempts to turn state's evidence and blame everything on her husband, the camera footage of her smirking while actively poisoning my food sealed her fate. It took the jury less than 2 hours to find her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, and grand fraud. She wept hysterically as the judge slammed the gavel down, sentencing her to 20 years in a maximum security facility. Detective Mitchell, the man who sold his badge and his honor for $100,000 of blood money, was stripped of his pension and sent to a federal penitentiary, a place where corrupt cops receive absolutely zero leniency. Even Dr. Thorne, the prominent psychiatrist who thought he was completely untouchable, lost his medical license and was handed a 10-year sentence for his role in the criminal conspiracy. The entire rotten network was dismantled, ripped out by the roots, and thrown into the fire to burn into bitter ash. With the legal proceedings finally behind me and the criminals locked away, I found myself driving up that winding road to the cemetery once again. The weather was different this time. The raging, freezing storm that had marred Martha's funeral was a distant memory. The sky was a brilliant, endless sheet of blue, and the warm afternoon sun filtered through the green leaves of the ancient oak trees lining the paths. I parked my truck and walked slowly across the manicured lawn. I carried a bouquet of yellow roses, Martha's absolute favorite. I knelt down beside her polished marble headstone, running my fingertips over the elegant engraving of her name. The crushing grief that had threatened to consume me 6 months ago had transformed into a quiet, enduring peace. I laid the yellow roses gently at the base of the stone. "It's over, Martha," I whispered, my voice steady, filled with a deep, resonant calm. "The monster's gone. He will never hurt anyone ever again." I closed my eyes, letting the gentle breeze wash over my face, and for a brief moment I could almost feel the phantom warmth of her hand resting gently on my shoulder. I stayed there for a long time, talking to her about the future, about the promises I intended to keep. I told her that our 30 years of hard work, the millions we built by sacrificing our youth, wouldn't end up funding a criminal empire or purchasing luxury cars for an ungrateful child. It was going to serve a higher, nobler purpose, one that honored her memory. The following week, I contacted Victor and Garrett. I gave them explicit instructions to liquidate my estate. The massive colonial mansion with its heated pool and manicured lawns was put on the market and sold to a lovely young family. The remaining millions in the family trust, the exact money Derek had been willing to terminate his own family to secure, were withdrawn. I used every single penny to establish a comprehensive legal and medical foundation dedicated to protecting the vulnerable. We named it the Martha Ward Initiative. We hired aggressive forensic accountants, private investigators, and dedicated attorneys who provide their services completely free of charge to elderly individuals who suspect they are being financially abused or medically manipulated by malicious relatives. In just the past few months alone, we have rescued dozens of seniors from greedy children who were on the verge of locking them away in psych wards. We have clawed back stolen homes, emptied bank accounts, and delivered the exact kind of justice I brought down upon my own son. I lost the family I thought I had, but I found a new one in the countless people I've been able to help. I learned that true strength doesn't come from the blood flowing through your veins, but from the unwavering courage to stand against malice, even when that malice sleeps under your own roof. Blood relation is never an excuse for betrayal. If someone shows you they are a monster, believe them the first time. Have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel for more stories. Until next time, protect your peace.